Hi there, everyone. So excited, so happy to have you all here. Welcome to our webinar. If you all can see and or hear me, please just enter something in the chat just to say, hey, we can hear you and hi. I would super appreciate it. Awesome, I'm seeing some folks that can hear and see me. I wanted to welcome you to my name is Erin Adams, and for a lot of you, I know we've talked over email, but we've never met, so I just wanted you to see my face and see I'm a real person. Hi. Hola. So I'll be presenting your topic today, and your topic is using the laws of systems for effective agility. We all hate making changes just to have them come back and bite us in the butt. So this webinar is going to be basically about avoiding that very circumstance. So I will be sharing the stage with our Agile technical coach, Susie Hill, who does bring a huge wealth of Agile knowledge to us. I'm also going to be sharing the room with my furry roommate. Let's see if somebody says the video is stuck on the dancing T-Rex. Let's make sure that I've got let's make sure that I've got the screen shared correctly. Let's try again. There we go. All right, so you should see the first slide, I hope. You should see the title. All righty. So for everyone who registered in advance, I did send out a link to a graphic organizer, and some more folks cannot hear anything. I am sorry about that. We've got most of our folks can hear. If you need to adjust your audio settings, look in the dashboard. There's Susie. Hi.
Hi, everyone. I was waiting for you to finish, Erin. I want to see if I can help in terms of any technical support.
Okay, thanks. All right. Well, once we get started, I will, let's see if I can get that T-Rex to go away. It's supposed to be just showing the slide. Anyway,
Erin, there's a share media option at the top.
It's not on. There we go.
Okay.
Now there's the slide.
Very good.
Super. All right. So for anyone who registered in advance, I did send out a graphic organizer, and I also put the link in the chat here. So please access that, have that so you can follow along. So everyone's audio should be on mute except for me and Susie. And then at a certain point, we'll open up the field for some questions and brief polls, and we'll give everyone about 20 seconds or so to answer that. So we will take questions through the chat and the questions feature, and Susie will help moderate that for me. And so, and then at other points during the presentation, I will just stop and ask you to use your graphic organizer to pause and reflect on what we've just talked about and apply it to your own life, because this is a topic that I think everybody has a lot of familiarity with already. Even if they don't know it. It's kind of been instinctive for most of you though, so I want to kind of give you a language to put that into practice effectively and intentionally. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to move off of my webcam here so I'm not a distracting presence to all of you as we go through the slides, but I just wanted to show my face briefly to show you I'm a real person. So anyway, I will move off of the webcam now and we'll move on. sponsored by Cyberbond Federal Solutions and Raman Technologies. And let's see, we've got some folks that are having some error messages. Yes, they should try using Chrome. So our first poll is to ask you all about your level of familiarity with business agility. So I'm going to go ahead and publish this poll. Your poll is open right now. So go ahead and answer that. We're going to have a countdown here. So go ahead and answer that poll. How experienced are you with business agility? How much do you know about it? I think many of you may know a lot more than you think, but we are coming up on the close here. I'm going to close that poll. It looks like we have one of you who is a newbie. We have a third of folks who are learning it and a third of folks who know it well and are leading it in the organization. So awesome. Thank you so much. So, all right, let's move along. So basically, Agile is about working smarter rather than harder. So not about doing more work in less time, generating more value with less work. So business agility recognizes that because change is a constant and we always have to adapt to what's going on, we have to develop ways of working smarter rather than harder. So one of the major changes to business over the last 60 years has been increasing globalization as a result of increasing communications and transportation technologies. Agile businesses have to recognize this and respond rather than react to the rapid change of pace. So the way we do that is by recognizing and adopting the Agile Manifesto here. So Susie, I'm going to hand off to you here to talk a little bit about the Agile Manifesto and what this all means.
Super. Thank you, Erin.
Super. Thank you.
Erin, can you mute your mic? Erin, can you mute your mic? Yeah, I'm getting some feedback. Okay.
Oh,
good.
Got it.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. We typically like to start a webinar, especially since we're talking about Agile. Just refresh memories of anyone that might not have seen the Agile Manifesto in the past, or if you're new to Agile and you want to understand what the Agile Manifesto is. These are the 4 basic tenets, so to speak, with respect to Agile. And keep in mind, Agile, the Agile Manifesto was written by 17 people. It was written around 2001, I believe. And it was a group of really strong software developers who said, we've got a problem we want to solve, and this problem is, why is it taking us 2 and 3 years to deliver software? It doesn't have to be that hard, and it doesn't have to take that long. So they came up with a guideline or a manifesto about how to approach building software and delivering it faster, with the idea of delivering value quicker to the customer. So the 4 tenets, as you can see here, are individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working product, in this case software. Now bear in mind that has gone beyond to the service business and delivering products. So working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following plan. Many people have moved from understanding and practicing Lean or Six Sigma to the next evolution of that, process improvement, operations excellence idea into Agile. Lean and Agile, often companies try to implement them together. Lean is about removing waste from the process. Agile is about delivering value. Certainly they say you're going to, by the way you practice Agile, you are already not even introducing waste into the process, but you're delivering value. So these are the 4 basic tenets or guides of Agile. And there are another, let's say 12 or 14 principles, though we're not going to necessarily talk about those. But we do like to emphasize these because these are the guiding principles, guiding ideas, guiding values with respect to Agile. Erin, if you could advance the slide, that would be great. Super, thank you. So business agility, what we're talking about here when we talk about Agile is we're talking about gaining business agility. And notice there are a couple of different definitions here on the slide. It has evolved. Originally, it started out with, it refers to distinct qualities that allow organizations to respond rapidly to change. The idea here is without losing momentum or losing their vision. It's then evolved to, over time, as Agile has been taken on and used in organizations, to adaptability, flexibility, and balance, 3 qualities to sustain the viability of an organization, a product, a service, software. So at its core, we're talking about a mindset of being flexible, being adaptable, being willing to respond to change quickly, even in the face of changing requirements. And some people say that's counterproductive. We get requirements, we write software, and then all of a sudden mid-process, things change. Well, the idea with Agile and having business agility is that you can pivot on a dime, sometimes midstream, and be able to address and adapt to the changing needs of what happens. And this has really come about because we see such a rapid pace of change today. And Agile fits, and it is an attitudinal and behavioral way of conducting business that allows us to keep our competitive advantage as individuals as well as organizations. Erin, could you go on to the next slide?
Well, actually, so here's where I'm going to jump in, Susie,
Sure.
And, just let folks know that, with regards to this pivot that Agile requires us to do, one of the foundational concepts that's going to allow us to pivot in a smart way is the concept of systems thinking. So that's what we'll be talking about today. Systems thinking allows us to adapt to those changing circumstances with the flexibility and grace we need, instead of making organizational changes that backfire and wreak havoc to operations. So although systems thinking sounds like a really huge concept and really kind of daunting, I don't think it is. I think it's one that we all understand. I think we all understand it sort of instinctively, and we apply it intuitively to our daily lives. So at the end of the day, I'm really hoping that everybody is going to be able to think about the systems they participate in and be able to recognize the systems in all of their parts so they can adapt and flex with them. I want folks to feel more empowered to contribute to that system in a really powerful way. I want them to be more confident in their ability to make positive contributions to the system. And I want folks to be able to include more of their system in their thought processes at work, to be able to be more responsive to all of to everyone's needs in every part of the system, and make increases in productivity more sustainable. So that's where we get to learning about the 5th discipline. Woohoo! The 5th discipline is The book that this presentation is largely based on, it's got a really great explanation of systems theory, but it also segues into how you can use that to grow and adapt as an entire organization. And that will be the topic of our next presentation on learning organizations. So to get the full effect, I would recommend attending both webinars. But this is the foundational book that everything is based on. So if you want to read it for yourself, it's a pretty dense tome, but I recommend it. So what is systems thinking? Systems thinking is basically the exploration of interdependence, how you rely on me and I rely on you and we rely on them and they rely on us. There's a very famous environmentalist who is largely responsible for the founding of our national park system, John Muir. He says, when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. And that's really the way to think about a system. You can think about the highway system. We might think of cars as like the ultimate symbol of independence, but when we drive, we not only rely on the working system of the car we're piloting, we are also putting our lives in the hands of the other drivers on the road. And we also depend on the roads to get us there, that we expect them to meet together. I mean, there's a couple of places, Seattle is one I can think of, where the roads don't necessarily meet together. And it's a pretty frustrating experience, especially when Google tells you they do. So that's kind of an exploration of a pretty simple system. So let's drill down into an even simpler system. I have an example of here. When we use linear language, we might talk about, I am filling a glass of water. But in reality, you are not literally the agent filling the glass of water. You set the faucet position, which adjusts the flow of water, which changes the water level in the glass. And as the level changes, the perceived gap between the water level and the desired level also changes. And as that changes, your hand's position on the faucet changes again. So you can see everything is pretty interconnected, regardless of whether you think about it on a day-to-day basis or not, but this should be a pretty simple and easy one. So we'll talk about our own situations here in the workplace. What might a workplace system look like? So here are some inputs that might go into creating your workplace system. I'm sure I've missed some things. I'm sure that some of these inputs might even have been miscategorized, but this is just an attempt to show you how complex the system can be. And I haven't even attempted to scratch the surface or attempted to illustrate the various connections between each of the inputs into this system. So although I've emphasized that systems does not necessarily mean like the physical structure of something, physical structure is also an influence here that you can't necessarily list, and we'll talk about that as well. So let's try to map this out in a two-dimensional sort of connective map. What might that look like? So here's a little example. But to truly visualize the system, we also need to be aware of the interrelationships and not just the linear cause and effect chains. And we also need to think about the system through time. Everything is four-dimensional and things change over time. So that's also something we've got to think about. So let's take a moment here. We'll also talk about agile teams and organizations. So in the agile team, in the agile system, the user takes a very prominent role within the system. And in fact, agile makes a point of including users as a major stakeholder that they flesh out into actual like personas so that they can get an idea of what this user might actually want or how they might actually act in the system. So we'll take a moment to use our graphic organizer here. Just take about 3 minutes or so to make a sketch for yourself on your graphic organizer. Any system you want to, your workplace team, your household team. Think about, if you're doing your household, think about including things like, you're going to include every member of the household, and if those are kids, you want to include the schools that the kids interface with. If you have a regular doctor that you see, make sure to include them in the system. Thank you so much, Susie, for reposting that link to the graphic organizer again. Just take those 3 minutes and think about your own personal system. Think about the things outside of it also that might influence. If your kid's got a sports team that they're on, what influences that? The weather? Think about, your team. How do the clients interact? Who's influencing the client? Think about, in my own household, I have a couple of animals that I might even include. Sometimes there's no accounting for how your life might be disrupted by an unexpected hairball. Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone, for taking those moments to make a sketch and think about your systems. So as we think about the systems, there is a perspective that will help us to observe our system and influence it in a positive manner. And this perspective is called, in this book, we call it the 5 disciplines. The 5 disciplines are a way of getting to the point where you can effectively think about your system and influence it. So we'll talk about the first discipline, achieving personal mastery. To back up, what is a discipline? A discipline is a body of theory and technique. So with a discipline, you never really arrive, but you spend your whole life mastering and refining your learning. And that's what we're asking you to do here. So the more you learn with a discipline, really the more acutely you become aware of your own ignorance. And this is only because you start to realize just how much there is to learn about a topic. So the first thing, achieving personal mastery. This is all about continually clarifying and deepening our personal vision and focusing our energies, developing our patience and self-control, and seeing reality objectively. This is a necessary part of systems thinking, because if you can't really see everything objectively, you're not going to understand how it truly works together. In the really famous book of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, this is identified as part of the process of moving from dependence to independence. This is being proactive, starting change from within, improving your own life and situation through things you can actively influence, rather than simply reacting to external forces. This necessarily means seeing reality objectively, scanning the possibilities ahead and seeing ahead of time what you can actually influence rather than behaving reactively in some sort of denial. So if you're really going to think in a systems manner, you've got to be able to see things clearly. This is also beginning with the end in mind. This is also developing a principle-centered personal mission statement, extending the mission statement into your long-term goals based on your personal principles. This is developing who you are and who you want to become. Spending time doing what fits into your personal mission, observing the proper balance between production, doing and building the ability to do, or learning. So your next discipline to encounter is the shift in a mental model. Now, a mental model is a deeply ingrained assumption, generalization, or even a picture or image that influence how we understand the world and how we take action. The discipline of working with mental models starts with turning the mirror inward and learning to discover our real pictures of the world and really hold them up to the light and examine them. This is part of the process of moving from being a dependent person to an independent person. Again, we are changing our own lives and observing things that we can actually influence rather than just simply reacting to external forces. The next discipline is building a shared, yes, absolutely, Susie. Susie says, defining and practicing personal mastery is a key first step. Consider how you would define it and create a daily practice to grow both personally and professionally. Absolutely great advice. Practicing personal mastery, that's one of the things I hope that brought you here, is that you want to develop your own personal mastery. So building a shared vision. Building a shared vision is that practice of unearthing and uncovering what you share with another person. What are your visions of the future? This is a little bit different than the common vision or mission statement that's everywhere. This is a picture of the future that builds commitment and buy-in and enrollment rather than simply just compliance. So, this is not just the role for a leader. This is a role for all of us. This is a role for us within our families, to determine our family's goals, such as, maybe we're going to buy a house in 10 years and, we all need to buy into it, and maybe building a vision of, what the backyard will look like, or how many bedrooms will be in the house, or what colors you'll paint it. If you build that kind of shared vision, it makes it a lot easier for everybody to move in the same direction, and so you build that goal of owning a home in 10 years. And so every time somebody speaks up and says, let's go out to eat, you can all say, hey, but what about our dream house? And it keeps everyone on track toward that shared goal of home ownership, for example. So in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, this is part of moving from independence to interdependence. This is our shared vision depends on each person's mutual agreement of what the team means, what we want to accomplish, and how we treat each other. The shared vision is not only pointing the way to where we are all going, but it is also personally walking the walk about how we're going to get there. This is building a vision of, are we going to do this while behaving ethically and treating each other's confidences with care? Or is it the opposite? We can't expect others to understand the vision for our company unless we show them. I mean, behavior is really a lot more important than just our words. Building a shared vision is also about seeking for a win-win situation, seeking agreements and relationships that are mutually beneficial. And sometimes it also means accepting the fact that agreeing to make no deal is the best alternative for everyone involved. The next of the 5 disciplines, team learning. Team learning is another move from being fully independent to working interdependently. Team learning starts with a dialogue. It starts with the capacity of team members to, withhold their preconceived notions, to suspend their assumptions, and enter into genuine thinking together. we want dialogue and not just discussion. Dialogue means ideas flowing freely across a group, and discussion is a little bit different. It has similar roots to the word concussion, and that's not really what we want. We don't want the heaving back and forth of ideas to beat each other about the head. We want the dialogue where we can really genuinely take in the learning. Team learning is the foundational learning unit in creating a system that works. So team learning is the essence of interdependence. It distills the concepts of understanding others, seeking mutually beneficial solutions, and synergizing to create a sum greater than, to create a whole greater than the sum of its parts. And all of those disciplines allow us to build to the last discipline of systems thinking. So I'm going to give you this cute little video here of some folks who did some systems thinking, and we'll talk about it. So you'll see the description here. The Society of Engineers poured a bowl of cereal in 75 steps. And the way that they did this, they had to work together for 3,300 hours to develop this. Not every single person did every single part of this, as you can probably imagine. But they did require the disciplines of a shared vision, of mental models that they shared. They required team learning so they could develop the skills together to make this happen. And they needed personal mastery. They needed their own personal dedication to growth in order to make this happen. So systems thinking makes the whole pattern visible, and it helps us to see how to change things effectively and with the least amount of effort, to find the leverage points in the system and pour that bowl of cereal. It provides us with the tools necessary to execute the final habit of highly successful people, which is sharpening the saw. Taking the time out from production to build our own production capacity through personal renewal of the physical, mental, social, emotional, and spiritual dimensions. There goes the milk. There was the milk. You know, one thing to realize, though, is that exercising all of these disciplines is not necessarily automatically going to make us a learning organization, but it will spark a new wave of experimentation, and there will be bumps. So, you know, expect that. Agile embraces bumps, failures as just another step to success. So that is one thing that we need to realize. So at this point, I'm going to ask everybody to stand up from their position. I know it sounds weird. Stand up and reflect on what we've just covered. So by standing, you've just increased the oxygen flow to your brain by 20%. Oh, oops. You've just increased the oxygen flow to your brain by 20%, which means that you are now thinking more clearly and efficiently. So use your graphic organizer to write down your reflections on the previous segment here about the 5 disciplines. Maybe which discipline is most important to you. If you have an observation you'd like to share with the group, we would love for you to offer it in the chat about any of these disciplines, or if you have a question about how something might apply to one of the disciplines, how you might develop your own personal mastery if you have an example of this, how your team practices team learning. I know a lot of you might be practicing team learning at the moment. You can probably look around and see if there are any folks standing up with you. And it's not silly. I'm standing up right now too, by the way. Does anybody have any observations for us about those disciplines? Susie is also standing. Awesome. So I just, one thing that strikes me about systems thinking is that I've been practicing it unknowingly all my working years since starting at Domino's Pizza, from learning all of the positions within the store and how they all fit together, and what each position can do to contribute more efficiently to the operations of the next. That, I think, was a major revelation, that there was actually a term for it, that somebody was seeing things the same way. And I tell you, it was amazing. Awesome. Well, I hope everybody had good observations on their personal organizers. We're going to move along to the next slide now, to the next section. The next section is all about, as we look at that whole system, as we observe the entirety of a chain of events, there are some things that are always absolutely true. And those truths are this: structure influences behavior is the number one biggest one for me, I think. And what this means is that if you have a single person in a situation and they are producing in a certain way, if you take them out of that position and you put another person with similar skills and abilities into that position, they will end up producing in a similar way. Systems can cause their own crises, and not external forces or individuals' mistakes. So structure in this case that we're talking about, it also includes how people make decisions, the operating policies whereby we translate the perceptions, goals, rules, and norms into action. This is, just like we think of structure as being a physical presence, the physical structure of our organization does also influence things. I can tell you that the physical structure of not being present in the office with the rest of my coworkers does definitely have an impact on how I do business. The reason that structural explanations are so important is that only structural explanations address the underlying causes of behavior at a level that patterns of behavior can be changed. So if we see that, somebody doing the equivalent work is going to have the equivalent outcome, is going to change how they work. So Susie asks how I structure my behavior daily when I work remotely. Well, one of the things that I'm sure to do is I try to be a little bit more available to folks. So I am on the West Coast, and my hours could technically be from, on West Coast time. But one of the things that I do is to structure my day from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. West Coast time so that I'm available to folks on the East Coast. Because otherwise we could have 3 hours of unavailability, actually 6 hours of unavailability, one on the front, one on the end. So that's one way. This structure can be very subtle, and the time that I just mentioned, that could be something that's very subtle for folks. But you have to think about that. We think about structure as being the external constraints on an individual, but it can also mean the interrelationships within a system. It can be those very hidden, informal meetings that folks don't really take time to document, but there's a lot of information conveyed. And if folks aren't aware of that within the structure, then they might not be able to address that in their decision making. The last truth of systems is that leverage often comes from new ways of thinking. So this is our ability to to move things around is, we can go through with the same old mindset that we've always used, but the same old mindset is usually the same mindset that created our problems. So we want to think in new ways. We want to banish those old mental models and bring on new mental models and find those subtle points of leverage. So the laws of systems are the shared characteristics of every system and how it will interact with each force within and outside of it. So there are some laws that go along with these systems' truths, and the laws kind of identify how the action is going to work. So the first law is that today's problems usually come from yesterday's solutions. Think about intended and unintended consequences. Often our solutions strike back to create new problems. Solutions that merely shift problems from one part of the system to another part often go undetected because those people who solved the first problem are not the people who inherit the new problem. So this adorable little fella here is the cane toad. The cane toad is a species that is native to South America, and it was introduced to Australia to control some pests. But what has happened is that not only did this Mr. Cane Toad destroy all the pests, but it also reproduces uncontrollably and is moving on to destroy the native species. So in this case, they now have a problem with these cane toads. Now these cane toads are the invasive species. So somebody else has suggested, we'll import a certain bird that comes in and eats the cane toads. Well, you might do that, but the birds might eat all the cane toads and then move on again to the native species. So we've got to think about, how we're going to structure today's solutions so that they don't become tomorrow's problems. The next law, the harder you push into a system, the harder the system pushes back. So humans have a really stubborn tendency to try to bully our way through tough situations when things aren't working out as we hope. We try to create short-term solutions that give temporary improvement at best. But here's what happens. So we have an example here with the law of unintended consequences in the airline business. Are folks there? So we have this issue in the airline business where what happens if we charge people to check a bag? Then we have folks that react to check a bag. And folks decide that they're going to carry everything on. And then, well, gosh, what are we doing here? Now the plane is delayed. Now we've got overtime for employees, gate surcharges, general penalties, whatever. The airline execs initially tried to find a good way of making some extra cash, but turns out the system and put them deeper into debt. The revenue is down, costs are up. Oh, I know, let's increase the baggage fee. So here is a case of the system pushing back. It says, you're not going to increase revenues that way. It's going to become a problem for you. The next law. So small changes can produce big results, but the points of highest leverage are usually least obvious. So again, we were talking about those very subtle points, like maybe the informal conversation that happens in the hallway. and maybe changing that informal meeting to a formal meeting and including more folks, that could produce big results. But you need to be able to document those little informal parts of the system in order to know to change them. So, the subtle here, you'll see these two folks here would probably never, successfully seesaw, but they've done something very small here, and they've just moved the fulcrum point. So now we've got a sumo successfully seesawing with a skinny dude. Similarly, if we do something very, very small, like Agile calls on us to automate wherever possible. That is, just one principle of Agile systems. But in my office, that means, the small points of change could be something like having a template, or programming a macro to use in Excel. Or maybe I can just use a better formula to get me what I need. So these small repetitive changes are really where the greatest points of growth are. The next law of system: behavior grows better before it grows worse. So in this law of systems, this is the familiar situation of there being a problem, and we all decide that we are going to work harder. We're going to be more diligent. We're going to just do more of whatever it is that we're already doing. And usually this works in the short term. Usually, we can see those immediate results and they're great. But what happens is, because we are not digging into the underlying cause of the problems, we usually just end up creating more work for ourselves. So I'll give an example. I was with a leasing agency, and we had some paperwork that was not being completed correctly. Well, our paperwork was pretty complex, and it went along with a computer system where you had to enter the data at the same time. And we decided that we would just institute more layers of checks. And it worked really well. We had one person who did the initial paperwork, one person who did the check through on at the evening time, and everything seemed to be going well. But then things started to slip through the cracks. Then we instituted another layer of check, this time the next morning. Now we've increased our work. We've got 3 people going through the same paperwork, the same amount of work for now 3 people instead of just 1. The underlying cause that we eventually discovered that helped everything get better was that we aligned the fields on the paperwork to the fields on the data entry. Things were missed much less often. The other layers of check were unnecessary because the data entry system did it for us. And we didn't have to put the Band-Aid on it anymore. So the next law of systems: the easy way out usually leads back in. What this means is that when we choose to take the easy solution, whether it's shortcutting a process, whether it's ignoring a regulation, whatever it is, this usually just comes back to bite us back in the butt, and usually with increased consequences. So this is seen in things like, if folks ignore their bills, that's the easy way out. You don't have to deal with them because you're just ignoring them. But in the long run, you will end up paying them. You will end up paying late fees. You will end up dealing with legal problems, all of those things. that's the easy way out that usually leads back in. The cure can be worse than the disease. This one is hard because the cure is so often easy and familiar, and it's just so accessible, but it can be addictive and dangerous and could also induce dependency. So this is called shifting the burden to the intervener. This is the initial problem being moved to another step in the system, just trying to push it away from us. So in the case of, say, drug and alcohol dependency, you have a person who initially drinks or does drugs to alleviate their stress. And then they find that this is causing them problems, getting to work on time, and causing them problems with productivity, which causes them more stress, which causes them to drink or do drugs more, which causes them problems at home and with their family, which causes them more stress, which causes them to want more. So this is an example of the cure being worse than the disease. This can also be seen in the workplace in terms of somebody who has to send regular reminders, and then we become reliant on the regular reminders. And, even though it is our particular task and it should be on our own radar, we kind of shift the burden off to somebody else to remember and to do that part of the task. And shifting that off can just lead us to become absent-minded in general, and then require reminders for everything else. So we need to be aware that the cure for the problem can be worse than the disease. The next law of systems: faster is slower. Now, I know that at the first taste of success, it is sometimes really tempting to advance at full speed, go off without caution. But sometimes the optimal rate of growth is a lot slower than we want it to be, or it's a lot slower than the fastest growth that is possible. And this doesn't sound really affirming because we all want to see immediate results, right? But, I do want to encourage you not to become discouraged at this law. The end result does take hard work on the front end, but moving your organization to the systems perspective, it enables you to have synergy and increased productivity and unity in the long run. So for this faster is slower, I'll give the example of somebody who wants to start a business, and they have several steps they need to take before they can even open their doors. So say, for example, though, that the impatient business owner decides that they are going to go ahead and buy their merchandise. They're going to go and rent their storefront. Oh, but they forgot to register their business with the right business licenses and tax IDs. And if they sell any of their merchandise before getting any of these things, before having these things on hand, the cost of business could go up really sharply with fines and fees from regulators. And, maybe even the business won't even open because you're dealing with legal problems from allowing people in before you have certificate of occupancy. So faster can be slower. We can rush ahead, but laying the planful foundation usually gets you there faster. The next law of systems: that cause and effect are not usually closely related in time and space. The picture that I've used here of these folks playing chess is an example that I use because chess masters say that the opening move in a game of chess, even games of chess that last for years, the opening move is a huge determinant on the outcome of the game. What this law tells us is that we need to be careful of confusing causation and correlation. That sometimes, when we do something and then a thing happens immediately after it, they're not always related. And sometimes the effects of what we do today aren't seen for years down the road. So in my own line of work here, I can tell you that the orientation that an employee receives can influence how they behave, several years down the road. And so we want to make sure that the opening move is a good one. And you can see here's another example of cause and effect not usually being closely related in time and space. Sometimes when things take time to really fully get realized, the effect is magnified over time. So you can see this in a situation where we have, say, for example, a product being ordered from a retailer who then has to order it from their distributor, who then has to order it from their manufacturer, who then has to order it from their supplier. And in each step of the way, there's a delay. Susie mentions that the bullwhip effect is also discussed in theory of constraints methodology. So if you want to take a closer look at the bullwhip effect and how cause and effect through time and space can be magnified, take a look at the theory of constraints methodology. The next law of systems. You can have your cake and eat it too, but you cannot have it all at once. So what this means, rigid either-or choices in business are really not uncommon. You can either do one thing or you can do that thing. But when you remember that you have time, sometimes you can do that thing first. You can do that thing now, and then you can do that other thing much later. So don't limit yourself to solutions just because you can't do it now. So this, in the larger scope of things, if you persist in leading your organization toward a vision-oriented and long-range perspective, you can enjoy your cake and eat it too. You can enjoy harmony in both relationships and immense productivity in the world. So profits later. The next law of systems. Dividing an elephant in half does not produce two small elephants. So what this means is, as a leader, you can fail to see the whole system at your peril. You can try to divide out parts of the system and solve the problems independently in those parts, but it doesn't necessarily solve the problems for your whole system. If you fail to perceive the entire system, it could lead to decisions that are not optimal, tasks that are repeated, time and energy lost, and maybe even losing, compliance or followers. So Singha uses the elephant to illustrate that organizations tend to try to address problems and issues by isolating them, forming a committee or a team to study them. But that cuts off parts of the elephant. It keeps you from seeing the whole issue. Every part of the organization affects every other part. So you need to make your decisions with the entire elephant in view. And how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Again, subtle changes produce the biggest effect. The last law of systems, and I think the most important for me, is that there is no blame. Now, this is a refreshing rule, I think, for a lot of people in the business world. People and organizations like to blame, point fingers, raise suspicions about events, situations, problems, errors, mistakes. Sometimes we even believe the blame we throw around. Sometimes we even believe that we are to blame. But in reality, we and the cause of events, situations, problems, errors, and mistakes are all part of the same system. So rather than blaming someone or them or yourself or a competitor, this law of systems helps us to remember that we are the problem. And so are they, and so are those things and that as well. There is no outside the problem. There is you, and the cause of your problems are part of a single system. It's all within the organization and the systems in place or not to deal with and respond to problems, successes, backlogs, etc. So once we realize that we all share the success, we all share the blame, we can move from a finger pointing mindset to an agile mindset of really discovering and digging deep for the real causes of issues and working together to problem solve. So I wanted to take a moment to take a poll here and have everybody respond. I'm going to open the poll about which of these systems laws do you think will have the biggest impact on how you think about teams, organizations, and processes. So we have about 20 seconds here. Go to the poll tab. Which of these systems laws was the most impactful to you, was the most important, the most revelatory? Where do you see yourself applying more of your solutions? And I'm going to continue. I'm going to give it a few more seconds on that poll to let more folks answer. So I know the systems law that is most impactful for me, but I want to know what it is for you. Okay. So what I'm seeing here is I have some folks who are saying today's problems come from yesterday's solution, and behavior grows better before it grows worse. Cure can be worse than the disease, faster is slower. But I have most folks who are responding, there is no blame. Small changes can produce big results. That's the big one there. And the easy way out usually leads back in. Awesome. Great. Well, I really hope that, as you move through your day, you can apply those laws and see how they're going to fit into your world on a daily basis. And I hope you will join us for the next part of this session, the 7 learning disabilities that are keeping your team from agility and how to fix them. From there, we'll move on to the second part of the 5th discipline, the forming a learning organization part. And we'll explore the roadblocks that might keep your team from working together effectively and how to get back on track. Then after that, in September, we'll be presenting a webinar about how to develop your high-performing team and avoid conflict, remembering, of course, there is no blame. We encourage you to please attend those webinars coming up, and I'll send you out the notices as well. So on behalf of my co-presenter and our sponsors, I wanted to thank you very much. Thank you so much for your participation and your forbearance as we work with our new technology. I hope this session has been informative and helpful to you, and I appreciate your time. Thanks so much, everyone.